Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister has appealed to EU leaders for one more push to get her Brexit deal through Parliament. Speaking in Grimsby, Theresa May warned of a moment of crisis if MPs again reject her deal when they vote on Tuesday. She said if it was voted down again, it could result in a softer Brexit or no Brexit at all, which she said would be a political failure. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar reports now from Grimsby.
Hard work this, a bit like Brexit, or maybe a journey, going nowhere, destination unknown. So today the Prime Minister came here to Grimsby, where 7 out of 10 voted to leave. Her appeal to MPs, back her plan.
Reject it, and no one knows what will happen. We may not leave the EU for many months. We may leave without the protections that the deal provides. We may never leave at all.
And then, with Brexit talks deadlocked, this message to Brussels.
But just as MPs will face a big choice next week, the EU has to make a choice too. The decisions that the European Union makes over the next few days will have a big impact on the outcome of the vote.
Are you simply keen to shift the blame for the way the talks have deadlocked towards the European Union and away from yourself?
My message to the European Union is very clear. This is the moment. This is the time. The British public, as I say, have moved on. They want us to get this done. It takes both sides to get that negotiation through.
Are you willing to contemplate allowing Conservative colleagues, including ministers, to vote to block a no-deal Brexit, given you said it could harm Britain and the British people?
For those who don't want us to leave without a deal, actually the best way is to vote for the deal so that we leave with that deal.
It's gone downhill, haven't we, the last few.
Down at the docks, you could find sympathy for Mrs May, but also impatience.
I think Margaret Thatcher would do a better job. I mean, she's got more balls, don't you? But, you know, a lot of people didn't like her.
Obviously, she can help us out and stay by us and try and sort this out, and it'll be good for all of us around here.
No matter what Theresa May comes up with, they're going to throw it out. A, it doesn't help she's a lady. If she was a big strapping bloke, they might have different views on it.
Sympathy in the country may comfort Mrs May, but at Westminster she's suspected of taking Brexit down to the wire, hoping MPs see her plan as the last best option. It could be the Prime Minister who runs out of road first. The threat's not just from Brexiteers. Some pro-European ministers say they'll ignore Mrs May if her deal fails and vote to stop her Brexit with no deal.
Myself and other colleagues will prevent the country from crashing out of the EU by voting against no deal. A no deal is not in Britain's interest.
The Labour leader's keen to see Mrs May defeated. Is he as keen on a referendum or backing away?
No, we're not backing away. What we're saying is the priority at this moment is to stop a no-deal exit. A no-deal exit would be very damaging to jobs, very damaging to industry.
In Brussels, the EU's chief negotiator wasn't impressed.
We are not interested in the blame game. We are interested in the result.
Just now, people are getting on with daily life. The next Brexit setback or breakthrough could change the country's future. But all people here and across the country can do now is wait to see how. John Pienaar, BBC News, Grimsby.
Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus is in Brussels, and there appears to have been some movement from the EU on this in a bid to help the Prime Minister. What does it mean, and will it be enough?
Sophie, that's right. This evening, Michel Barnier briefed the other EU 27 countries here, then released a series of tweets essentially responding to that challenge from the Prime Minister and saying this was what the EU was finally prepared to offer. So putting that on the table, the EU side say it's additional reassurances. The crucial thing is it is not the fundamental changes that many in the UK Parliament are demanding. What the EU side is offering is additional reassurance, legal reassurance about the fact it will use its best endeavours to try to secure a trade deal in the future. And also a key clarification, it says, that it says the UK will not be trapped, as some in Parliament fear, into any sort of customs union. The EU pointing out that that is in there because that was Theresa May's ask. But the UK can always withdraw from that if it wants. The crucial thing there was that the UK would have to agree to Northern Ireland staying under those special arrangements, and the EU essentially saying It will not accept the blame at this stage. It is pointing out the UK has always agreed to the idea of special arrangements for Northern Ireland. A backstop must be in either a UK-wide one, as Theresa May wanted, or a Northern Ireland-specific one, as the EU insists. The crucial thing, though, will that be enough? Already we're hearing from Northern Ireland that DUP sources are saying that won't be good enough for them. Michel Barnier says more talks will continue over the weekend, but hard to see that anything more can come from here now.
Damien Grammaticus in Brussels, thank you.
Theresa May has made a final push for MPs to back her Brexit deal, urging them to get it done. In a speech in Grimsby, the Prime Minister warned that if her deal was rejected again, Britain may never leave the European Union. Mrs May also called for Brussels to make concessions in one last push to get the deal done. And tonight, the EU has made a new offer of sorts. More on that in a moment, but first our political correspondent Libby Vina on Mrs May's message.
Some may still have their doubts about Brexit, but you won't find many in Grimsby, a town that embraced leave with a passion. An ideal spot then to launch a rescue mission, the Prime Minister imploring her Brexiter MPs to support the deal this time round, or risk losing Brexit altogether.
Back it, and the UK will leave the European Union. Reject it, and no one knows what will happen. We may not leave the EU for many months. We may leave without the protections that the deal provides. We may never leave at all. The only certainty would be ongoing uncertainty.
She appealed to MPs to look beyond Westminster when deciding how to vote.
Brexit does not belong to MPs in Parliament. It belongs to the whole country. The EU has to make a choice too. My message to them is now is the moment for us to act.
It's no coincidence that Theresa May came to Grimsby today, a town where 70% voted to leave the EU. Her message to those backbenchers still refusing to support her deal: how could you let these people down? But the immediate response was not encouraging.
The deal is not Brexit. That's why the House of Commons overwhelmingly rejected it. It wasn't because 400 MPs turned up a bit grumpy one morning. It's because they've read the withdrawal agreement. They know it means we don't leave.
The Labour leader wasn't one round either.
We will not be supporting her deal next Tuesday. We'll be voting to take no deal off the table. We'll once again be putting our proposals, our 5 pillars, which are a customs union, market access and protection of rights.
Just 4 days to go before the big vote in Parliament, and Theresa May is still battling to save her deal and possibly her premiership. Libby Vina, ITV News, Grimsby.
And we can join our correspondent Angus Walker. There he is, live in Brussels. So Angus, Theresa May wanted concessions from the EU. What are they offering her?
An unprecedented response here in Brussels to Theresa May's speech, with Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, tweeting out the nitty-gritty details of the negotiations over the backstop, the major sticking point. The backstop is this insurance policy designed to avoid a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland if no future trade deal can be negotiated. It would keep the UK in the EU's customs union if no trade deal could be negotiated. What Michel Barnier is saying is he's made an offer to the UK that the EU would be bound by stronger language to come up with a trade deal to avoid using the backstop in the first place, and also that the UK could unilaterally leave the backstop as long as Northern Ireland stayed in the EU's customs union. That's an idea that's been soundly rejected by Theresa May, but Michel Barnier clearly wanting to avoid any blame, any accusation that the EU isn't willing to try to find a solution to this last-minute standoff.
The EU stands united. We are not interested in the blame game. We are interested in the result, and we have made proposals.
It's now up to the UK to come back with counter-proposals or to accept your proposals.
We are still working, but we have made proposals.
I understand the response to Michel Barnier's proposals from the UK side has been pretty lukewarm. Nothing new and not enough is what I'm hearing. Now, talks between the UK and the EU will continue over the weekend, but they are still being described as being at a difficult stage.
Angus, thank you.
Now, with the vote on her deal coming back to the Commons on Tuesday and with exactly 3 weeks to go until Brexit, Theresa May was in Leave voting Grimsby today with a message for the EU.
Next week, members of Parliament in Westminster face a crucial choice: whether to back the Brexit deal or to reject it. Back it, and the UK will leave the European Union. Reject it, and no one knows what will happen. We may not leave the EU for many months. We may leave without the protections that the deal provides. We may never leave at all. The only certainty would be ongoing uncertainty.
Telling the EU that the decisions it makes in the next few days will have a big impact didn't go down well. We're not interested in the blame game, retorted Michel Barnier. But the EU side has made what's been billed as an offer as a way of showing that Britain wouldn't be forced into a customs union against its will. So how will events next week pan out?
Currently, there's the plan to have a meaningful vote on the Tuesday, the 12th of March. So that will be an approval motion, which will be amendable by MPs saying that MPs approve the deal. If that passes, then we would move on to the legislation which is needed to implement the deal, which I can imagine the government would want to introduce quite quickly. If MPs reject the deal on Tuesday, then there will be 2 further votes in the House. So far, it's expected to be a vote on Wednesday on whether to leave without a deal, and then a vote on, if that is rejected, which so far we presume it will be, that option, then there will be a vote on whether to request an extension of Article 50.
So that's the schedule, but what will actually happen? And well, joining us to try and predict the path of Brexit are the author and journalist Paul Mason, comment and features editor at City AM Rachel Cunliffe, and LBC's Ian Dale. And also we brought back the famous Newsnight whiteboard. We're all thrilled about that, I'm sure. We got down there Theresa May, how she wants it to go next week. Have the meaningful vote, tick, it's passed, her deal's passed, we leave on the 29th of May. Do any of you, I mean, raise your hand if you think that is likely to happen or even feasible?
No chance.
No chance. No. OK, no chance. So, Ian, go for it. Tell me what you think is going to happen.
Right. Well, on the meaningful vote, if you ask the same question twice, you're probably going to get the same answer. So I think that won't go through on Tuesday. I think the majority will be quite substantially down on the 230 from last time, but it won't be enough to get it through. So then on Wednesday, there will be a vote on no deal. And the motion will be this House approves no deal. It won't approve no deal. And I suspect, again, by a very substantial margin, it won't do that. So then we get to the vote on the extension of Article 50. Now, I think that might be a little closer than people think, but I think that will go through. So that's all relatively simple up to that point. And then you introduce the European Union into the equation. Now, there's the Council of Ministers meeting on, I think, the 21st of March. And at that, Theresa May will presumably then say, well, we need to extend Article 50, or maybe she won't, because she might want to go for a meaningful vote 3 a bit later, maybe within 2 days of us leaving on the 29th. There are 2 options here. She either goes for a short extension of 2 or 3 months, but that is predicated on her vote going through, and it would just be a technical extension so Parliament could get the legislation through. They'd probably agree to that. But if the vote hasn't gone through, why would they agree to that? And France has already indicated it would veto it. Lithuania has said the same thing. France has said, well, we would consider a 2-year extension because in the 2 years, we could have another referendum. All sorts of things could happen, a change of governments. It could be a whole new ballpark. So that, I assume, is what the French agenda is. And if they do that, I suspect they'll put some pretty stringent conditions on that. So I think, I've put a cross here, but I think it's quite arguable as to which way that would go. Now, in any of these scenarios, I think Theresa May could then not be Prime Minister, say, by the end of April. Because if it's a 2-year extension, there is no way that the Tories want her to lead the negotiations doing that extension. If her vote goes through, she's served her purpose. So then we get a Tory leadership election, and I'm on Newsnight every night.
Well, we'll see about that. OK, Rachel, what about you?
Okay, so we can all agree that the meaningful vote on Tuesday, she's delusional if she thinks that that is going to pass, so no. What we come on to then is the vote on the no deal. The ERG, Jacob Rees-Mogg, will try and convince us that that wouldn't be as economically disastrous as people think, but that is also going to fail. We get a vote on the extension, and again, I agree with Ian that given that there will now be very, very little time to get something through, Parliament will probably agree to that. But as Ian says, it's then up to the EU. I actually think that there is no appetite in the EU for any kind of extension. They have European parliamentary elections coming up in May. They don't want this to drag on any longer than we do. And if they are going to make any kind of extension at all, they are going to demand that Britain holds either a second referendum or a general election. Now, both of those are options that Theresa May is never going to agree to, even if Parliament has asked for an extension. What she's left with then, 21st of March, 8 days to go until Brexit, a last-ditch effort to tell MPs that basically it's now or never. We are going to leave on the 29th of March without a deal if you don't back the deal. So we come to meaningful vote 3, very, very exciting, and I think she might just about, let's say, 11th hour, 28th of March, even the 29th of March, get that through, and we leave.
OK. And Paul, do you agree?
Well, I mean, no surprise that on the meaningful vote, I just don't think she's going to do it. The great fear on the Labour, on the progressive side of politics, is that 20 or 30 Labour MPs flip over out of panic. But it's not going to happen on Tuesday. Then, like everybody else, there's no sub-60, less than 60 MPs are going to vote yes to a no deal. But then, on the vote on the extension, look, we get to request an extension. We don't get to control what Theresa May does with that request. So I think the vote on the extension goes through. That's where the interesting thing begins on Wednesday, between then and the 21st of March. Because I think what she will then do is take the vote for an extension and use it to almost replay what my colleagues have already said, to replay the pressure to get the meaningful vote 3 through. But I just don't think she's going to get it. And therefore, I think there is a strong temptation for Theresa May then, after the 21st, after the EU meeting, to go for an election. She can do that. It's within her control. And technically, Labour also wants that. And
yeah, it's what you're after.
It's what the Labour front bench says they're after, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I suppose, so let's start with Tuesday then. All of you are agreed she's not going to pass her deal, right? So, despite the appeals today, despite whatever happens on the weekend through Geoffrey, despite the fact that it's 3 weeks to go until Brexit, till we're supposed to leave, it's just not going to happen.
Well,
I mean, we're in this period of incredible uncertainty.
Because there is nothing for her to say. We've had 6 or 7 weeks now of these supposed negotiations. Only recently, I think, has the government actually put something firm on the table. Even the EU now deny that they've got a proposal. Well, Geoffrey Cox says they absolutely have. It's as clear as night follows day. And yet they're calling it insane and crazy. Michel Barnier today has come up with what he says is a concession, going back to the original version of the backstop, which would have a line down the Irish Sea. Well, that was rejected way before, I think, November. So there is no movement. So the result is not going to materially change. I think I slightly disagree with Paul, and I think there will be quite a few Labour MPs who peel off in this vote on Tuesday. There'll certainly be more than there were last time, though that's not difficult. But in the third one, that if there is a third meaningful vote, I mean, can you really conceive there would be a vote the day before we leave? I suppose it's possible.
The EU is famous for 11th hour, clock strikes midnight, managing to get something through, a compromise, some kind of, fudged language won't quite work in this case because we need something legally binding, but they have said that they are prepared to make legally binding some noises that Jean-Claude Juncker has made on the backstop being sort of temporary, possibly. I also think that the EU doesn't want this to drag on. They've got these European elections coming up in May. The EU Commission may very much want to punish Britain, but there is support for Britain and for Brexit in the anti-EU parties across the EU. They don't want Brexit to become a European election a campaign issue, which it absolutely will do if this goes on past that deadline. So the EU does have an incentive right at the last minute to help Theresa May get a deal through.
Paul, you didn't put a third meaningful vote on there, but...
I mean, look, I think it's a possibility, but the shock value of getting the vote on the extension, when Theresa May, we've had the zombie deal for 4 months now on the table, it never changes, and that's why it keeps getting voted down. All this stuff backwards and forwards to Brussels is a show voting for the Tory backbenchers, and I think in the end they realise there's nothing changing. In addition to the European elections, there are, of course, 2 elections going on in Eurozone countries. The idea that the Barnier is going to throw Varadkar in Ireland under a bus for the sake of saving Theresa May is not there. And therefore, I think it's look, the strategic atmosphere in Europe is changing. The centre of Europe is worried. Macron this week, basically said, look, let's reopen the Lisbon Treaty. Let's rethink Europe. They are worried, and what they're worried about is, of course, as you say, the right-wing parties in all the European countries.
The populist left-wing parties as well. It's the anarchic left-wing party
very
in
few
Italy
of them
that's very
want to leave
anti-EU.
Europe. Very few of them.
And what is Labour's role in all of this? Where does Labour fit in?
Silence.
Well, look, since Jeremy Corbyn committed to the second referendum, I didn't put second referendum on there, although that's what I want. I don't think it's the most likely outcome. There aren't the votes for it. But since he committed to it, he is committed to going through the gears, as it were, to try and get.
You say going through the motions.
Well, going through the motions, even if they do, to get to the point where it's not on the agenda, is an important point for Labour, because it then opens up other possibilities. We know that they've been talking about Norway.
I think the best thing electorally for Labour and for Jeremy Corbyn is that this deal goes through. It's Theresa May's deal. Maybe a couple of rebel Labour MPs vote for it, but it is her deal, a Tory Brexit. He gets to leave the EU, which is what he's wanted for his entire parliamentary career, and he gets to blame the Conservatives for any fallout from that. So his perfect outcome probably is actually May's deal going through, so he can blame her for it in the next election.
I think one of the interesting things here is Paul's supposition that there then could be a general election. I think we have to look at the scenarios that would bring that about, and I think the most likely scenario is that the whole government just collapses in on itself, and that is almost happening now. You look at the fact that the Chief Whip has lost complete control. He sacks Alberto Costa, the junior PPS, and yet allows cabinet ministers to do interviews and write articles that are completely opposed to government policy. In the end, it could be the cabinet that brings about the fall of Theresa May. If you have 2 of the 4 factions in the cabinet uniting against her, they could bring her down. Now, I don't think that would trigger a general election, but it would trigger a Tory leadership contest.
What do you think the public makes of all of this, of politicians, and do we believe that turmoil's coming and the public's prepared for it?
No, I don't. I think the public is partly bored by the whole thing, just wants it finished, get over it. Don't really mind what the outcome is.
Brexit.
Just get on with it and do it. I think if we don't leave on the 29th of March, I don't think anybody should underestimate the sense of betrayal that not all of the 17.4 million who voted for Brexit will feel, but a substantial proportion of them will, and a lot of them will just decide never to take part in democracy again.
I also think that people are losing patience with a government that is only focused on one issue. We've seen this week, there's been knife crime in the headlines every single day. The idea that the government has taken its eye off the ball when it comes to actually governing the country. And then we had Philip Hammond yesterday, or the day before yesterday, saying that he'd make more funding for police available, if MPs voted through the deal, playing politics with law and order and criminal justice. Exactly, and I really think that is coming across in public sentiment.
I do think you could say the public's sick of Brexit, but the electorate is also very exercised by the cultural and political questions that lie behind Brexit, probably more so than they were. Theresa May went to Grimsby and Cleethorpes today. These are very strongly pro-leave areas where we know from polling pro-no deal sentiment has risen. So I don't see the public switching off. They switch off because actually nothing's happened. Now we're going to get them compressed into a single month, probably a year's worth of politics. And I think that the fact that we're talking about May goes, we leave the European Union with 1 day to spare, or an election, or even a second referendum.
It's dramatic.
People should not feel bored by this, because we are about to enter the most exciting 4 weeks of politics that we've all probably experienced in our adult lives.
Well, that is something to look forward to very much, in a way. Ian Dale, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. And no doubt the whiteboard will be back at some point very soon.